Hello and welcome to this review of my Cherry G80-0486H/03 keyboard. This thing has seen quite a lot of action and even modification throughout its lifetime. It was donated by a colleague when they got rid of their old HPLC system, which is a machine that separates chemical compounds based on their varying rates of adsorbance to a retaining medium. As some of you may know, I work at a chemical laboratory for my day job, so this is the sort of thing we have lying around. Thanks again, May. It came with a separation system, which is a Dutch brand of chromatography machines, and it was extremely old, from a time when manufacturers used to sell integrated systems with all kinds of proprietary connections and stuff. As a result, although it uses a simple 5-pin DIN plug, which would have been typical at the time, which in my estimation would be somewhere in the mid-80s, but the protocol it uses is not typical XT or AT, and as a result I can't get it to work on a modern computer, so I couldn't do the customary week-long test with it, which is not a fact I'll lament, but we'll get back to that in a minute. This non-standard protocol is a problem in both directions, unfortunately. The group that donated this to me asked me to fix it for them a few years ago because it wasn't working properly, but because of the weird protocol I couldn't just connect some other AT/XT keyboard to the system, it had to be this one. So I looked into what was going on and I found that 2 of the switches didn't open properly, and so they registered as permanently on, and that caused it to malfunction. So I solved it very simply by just shunting the contacts with some cardboard, and those little pieces are still in here, as you can see. One of the keycaps is also missing and another is loose. However, that's not the only modification done to it. The bottom of the keyboard is not original, as it's clearly a different type of plastic, never mind a different color, and these bolts and feet also don't look original. I've been told that what happened is that the bottom of the keyboard started buckling and basically just went to shit, and so they asked the university's mechanical workshop to make them a plastic pan to use as a bottom housing. In fact, the keyboard appears to have gone through quite a lot in its lifetime. The top looks massively corroded. Doubtlessly, this is a result of its use with a liquid chromatography system, so it'll have had lots of organic solvents drip onto it. This is also why, when I brought over my Focus 8000 keyboard to the office for use with their own ESIMS system, I put a clear warning on it to please be careful with it, lest it end up like this one. The keyboard was made by Cherry themselves, as you can see from their telltale old model sticker here, and it was manufactured in West Germany. The printing is almost illegible, but with some lighting tricks and close-up shots I could just about make out that it's model G80-0486H/03. I suspect that the suffix is there to designate that this is a version of that model made specifically for separations. It comes with Cherry M8 switches, which are one of the predecessors of Cherry MX. Specifically, this was their super low profile switch at the time. Unlike Cherry MX, it uses horizontally moving contacts to save vertical space, but it does use the same cross mount as MX, and the keycaps are two-way compatible. As you can see, the housing has quite a lot of space left here, and indeed there are DP-ST versions of this switch available as well, where this back houses a second set of contacts that can open and close. In fact, this version has the DP-ST compatible slider. The SPST only versions sometimes come with a slider that looks a bit different, with 2 crossbars at the back here that clearly don't permit a second set of contacts. For keyboards, the SPST version is the standard. I'm not aware of any keyboards that use the double pole type of switch. Alternatively, the space where the secondary contacts could go could house an LED, which is true for the 2 lock keys on this keyboard as well. This is the uncovered version of the switch, though there is a rarer covered version too. In truth, there are quite a few slightly different versions of Cherry M8 kicking around. The switches have a short 2.5mm throw, and they feel unpleasantly scratchy, plus the weighting profile is really weird somehow. And that's not a factor of its condition either. I have other M8 boards that are similarly bad. I mean, it's not horrifying or anything, but not exactly something I'd use for fun either. They're linear, though tactile versions also exist, but I haven't tried those yet. Or at least not that I know of. You never really know whether a Cherry switch is supposed to be tactile or not, in my experience. The switches are rated for 10 million operations, which was pretty standard at that time, and the typing noise is absolutely diabolical. To add to the switches' low-profile nature, the keycaps are also very low-profile. They're spherical double shots, and I don't think I need to do a solvent test anymore to see whether it's ABS or not, as you can see. The font and everything is very typical of Cherry at the time. They're pretty cool caps, and the battle-scarring and homebrew nature of the board adds a nice touch to it, in my opinion. It's definitely a board with a story. The layout is a typical example of that old era where they had absolutely no idea what made sense and what doesn't. It's got exactly the same key layout as the G80-06H, and in fact appears to be exactly the same keyboard as far as I can tell, apart from the cable, and there are a lot of curious button placements here, some of which were common at the time and others not so much. The arrow keys are arranged in a line shape, but they're located on either side of the spacebar. Left and right square bracket are not next to, but on top of each other. The escape key is not the top leftmost key, that's the delete key instead. By the way, there's a second delete key here with a bar below it, which I think might mean delete line feed or page break or something like that. The key next to minus and underscore is the tilde and circumflex key, with plus being down here. In fact, the shift symbols are scrambled a bit in general on this keyboard. And there is no enter key. Instead, it has what I'm pretty sure is a carriage return key, which is shortened to CR. A particularly interesting placement is that of these keys here. The alpha lock, which is basically the old equivalent of caps lock, is in the position where caps lock would go in later days, as well as in days before it during the typewriter era. But in the time this would have come out, this space was usually where they would put the control key instead, and they would stick the caps lock somewhere else on the board. But with this model, they chose to put the control on the left as well, specifically where the tab key lives, which is otherwise absent from this keyboard. By the way, the other lock key here probably locked the symbols or something like that. Overall, I can imagine that this layout would be quite awkward to use on a modern system, but for the machine it was paired with, it was probably fine. Like I said, at the time they didn't know yet what would stick and what wouldn't, though the Model M which brought the eventual answer was conceived of as early as 1984. Overall, I think this is a super cool keyboard. It's always such a treat to dive into the history of keyboards, particularly if they're as mysterious and storied as this one. It was clearly a fairly cheap model back then, with Cherry build quality, hence why they had to replace the housing, but its small size and especially its low profile would have looked very sleek and modern at the time, I imagine. I mean, Cherry MX, which came out later, was a much taller switch, and yet that was conceived as a low profile switch, so these were really minuscule for the time. That's it for this review. Thank you for watching. I hope you enjoyed it and following as a typing demonstration of me typing on this keyboard.